When Pier 21 officially opens on July 1st, it will welcome a whole new wave of visitors. But they will just be the latest in a long series of arrivals. For more than 40 years, this warehouse on the Halifax waterfront has been the doorway to a new home and a new life for millions of immigrants. The doors of Pier 21 opened in March of 1928. From that time until the mid-1930s, the first stream of Eastern European immigrants arrived. Many of those newcomers were Ukrainian and Polish. From 1939 to 1945, immigration temporarily stopped and World War II deployment began. More than 490,000 Canadian troops passed through Pier 21, destined to fight for their country overseas. After the war in 1946 to 1948, Pier 21 welcomed a new wave of immigrants. War brides and their children arrived. Many of them came from the United Kingdom after meeting Canadian soldiers during the war. From 1947 to 1951, thousands of Eastern Europeans would flee the ravages of their war-torn homelands to settle in Canada. For these displaced persons, Pier 21 would be their first stop in a long and painful journey to a new life. And from 1950 to 1970, as the Iron Curtain came down and the map of Europe changed once again, more Europeans, many from the West, would pack up their belongings to start a new life in Canada. So, for 50 years, it was the unofficial gateway into Canada. The stories of the people who landed here at Pier 21 in Halifax are as similar as they are different. Some were fleeing, some were meeting up with loved ones, others saw Canada as a new start. More than 1 million immigrants landed here, and they tell 1 million stories. Their experiences are a unique part of our country's history, and they helped shape our policy of letting strangers through our doors. Catherine Clark has this feature report.
November 1948. Kell 11 jõudis Sunday, November 14, 1948. The first impression of the ship was rather poor.
The voyage of the Walnut is one of those events in Canadian history that doesn't even get a footnote. But the arrival of 340 Estonian refugees crammed into an old British minesweeper fleeing the Russians was their journey to becoming Canadians. Manny Sane was just 21. He took pictures and kept a diary of the trip that began in Sweden in November 1948 and ended across the stormy North Atlantic at a pier in Halifax. The Walnut was so loaded with people, they slept 2 to a bunk.
You had to go in with your head first, and then you come up with your feet first again. You couldn't just, but you could turn around. And I suppose it must have been about maybe, I don't know if it was 3 feet wide or not, but there was another guy beside me, so we were two of us. It was sitting by the pier, kind of crooked. It wasn't even sitting straight, I don't know why. I guess there was too much stuff on one side of it. And it didn't really look much of a ship. When you think of it, it was going to go across the ocean.
The Walnut refugees came to this country illegally without permission from Canada. Their story is one of thousands that is part of the history of this pier, Pier 21 in Halifax. For more than 50 years, more than 1 million immigrants and refugees came through this shed. Some made their start here, some were sent back. But more than 90% were scattered across the country, shipped on trains to Toronto, Montreal. The prairies are beyond. New Canadians started arriving here in 1928, the beginning of Canada's experiment in multiculturalism. Before the Second World War, Canadian immigration policy was decidedly white and British. But after the war, when some of the largest numbers of immigrants landed in Halifax, the rules changed. Canada opened its doors to Eastern and Southern Europeans, some fleeing communist regimes, others tired of the daily struggle of living in war-torn Europe. Les Cruzan was with a wave of immigrants who fled Hungary during its bloody revolution of 1956. He came to Halifax young, optimistic, and stayed here while he waited for a friend to join him.
Basically, the communists were just like Nazis, you know. Rang doorbell at, you got 10 minutes to pack, and they took them away. I mean, a lot of people did disappear. You know, there were families who definitely, you know, sold everything or gave them away and gave up their apartments, and because they either had relatives in the West or you know, simply just didn't want to live in Hungary anymore. Remember, the 50s were the really terrible times.
Sister Salvatrice Leota, who now lives in Toronto, worked on the pier for 17 years alongside custom officials, immigration doctors, and a legion of volunteers. During the heyday of immigration, 5 ships a month came to Halifax, 1,000 immigrants a ship. She remembers her first impression of Pier 21.
Sister took me up to the where the immigrants were waiting to go through immigration. They had to be processed, and they had chicken wire that separated them from the rest of the building. And to look at them through this chicken wire, you know, my heart broke. I just couldn't believe that they would put people, you know, surround them this way.
Because of the crush of immigrants, Sister Leota and the other 2 nuns who worked with her often spent 18 to 20 hours a day at the pier. They helped those who stayed in Nova Scotia find work and shelter.
I think the saddest ones were the Hungarian refugees coming through, telling us how they had to hide in woods and hide in hovels, and how they narrowly escaped, and how they made it to immigration to get their passport to come to Canada. It was heartbreaking to see them come down the gangway and in army cast-offs. Even the women might have a man's army coat on or man's jacket. Very few of them had any luggage. And a lot of them didn't want to talk about their experiences. That was another thing. They sort of wanted to just close their mind to the terror they went through.
The war was boom time for Pier 21, with troop ships leaving to tearful goodbyes. To guest children arriving from the bombings in England, ships stacked the harbor. And then after the war, there were the war brides. 48,000 of them, married to Canadian servicemen, filled ships that came across the Atlantic. Barbara Christie married her Canadian husband 3 months after she met him.
A lot of people were getting married then. I could have been killed at any moment because of the bombing that was around there. He could have been killed. And I think the idea was something of the 2 of you will go on.
When Christie's husband became ill and returned to Canada, she followed. It was a dangerous crossing during wartime. She was one of 3 war brides on the ship.
By day, she zigzagged to avoid the submarines, and then at dark, she went bang straight, opened her engines, whatever they are, turbines, and she just shook.
Christie says no one even knew she had left England.
You wouldn't tell your best friends what you were doing, and even when they informed me that I would be going. If you remember looking at that paper, it said secret. So I couldn't even tell my parents.
There was no one waiting for Joseph Rothbart when he came to Canada. This picture of him as a young man, as a displaced person, is one of the few mementos he has of his life after the war. Nothing is left from before. More than 100,000 people like Rothbart, without family, without a country, came to Canada after the war. Rothbart spent a year in concentration camps. Of his family, only he and his brother survived.
Many of people of my age couldn't survive because as soon as one got sick, there was no treatment. So therefore, the question of survival was not to get sick at all, because you couldn't even get an aspirin. So it's, I think I was just lucky.
Canada wasn't his first choice. Rothbart was one of 1,000 Jewish orphans that Canada took in, welcoming them with open arms to Montreal. Still in the back of many people's minds was Canada's rejection of the St. Louis, a ship loaded with Jews fleeing from Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Canada turned the ship away, along with the rest of the Western world, back to Germany, to the death camps. Rothbart remembers how frightened he felt when he landed in Halifax.
Coming from a war-torn Europe where there was hardly any electricity, and the neon lights in Halifax were shining, and I thought that I'm going to get lost there. When we arrived to Canada, there was a kiosk on the pier, and had some beautiful apples, shiny apples, a lot of chocolate bars, and I wanted to buy some, but I didn't have any money. So I never got around getting it. Years later, I had an opportunity to go to Halifax on business, and I went to the pier. I bought myself a dozen apples and a dozen chocolate bars because I promised myself years before when I arrived that I will do that one day.
After the Hungarians, the big wave of immigrants, immigration to Pier 21 slowed to a trickle. By the 1960s, most immigrants no longer came by ship. They flew into Canada's major cities. In her office at the pier, Sister Leota could feel the end of an era coming. Once she met 1 or 2 ships a week. Now there was barely one a month.
I was heartbroken when they closed it, you know, when they, I saw the need to close it because, you know, just for 1 ship a month or something, and if there were that many, I think that every immigrant will never forget the day they arrived at Pier 21.
At an Estonian church in Toronto, the trials of the refugees who left Estonia on a tiny ship called the Walnut are remembered. Nellie Lind and Koidula Roser were fleeing Russians when they set sail for Canada.
We just came together, you know, and we decided that we are leaving. You feel sort of happy that you made it over the ocean. And then another way again, you feel so sad that you had to leave everybody behind. You are here all by yourself. Strange country, even so people are nice. But still, you are alone, like we were.
The fate of family members who stayed in Estonia was brutal. Many perished in prison camps in Siberia. Now, 50 years later, 2,000 kilometers from a pier where they landed in Halifax, the people who came on the Walnut no longer think of themselves as refugees, but as Canadians.
That documentary was prepared by Catherine Clark. When we return, more on the story of Pier 21. 2 immigrants shared their first impressions of arriving in Halifax and a look forward to the pier's new life as a national centre. Stay with us. We'll be right back, live from Pier 21.
I'm Arnold Rovers. My family came from Holland in 1955. My parents and my brothers and sisters, there were 8 of us in the family, and we came to Nova Scotia as immigrants. Post-war Holland was still in great difficulties, and there was a great love for Canada that was generated because Canadian soldiers were so prevalent in the liberation of Holland in 1945. And so the connection between Holland and Canada was at that point, and still is, very, very strong. My parents basically were economic immigrants. They were looking for opportunity. And Holland was a very small country, very crowded. Canada was a country of wide open spaces, and they welcomed immigrants. It was a very, very exciting time. From my parents, it must have been very scary. From the children's perspective, as a 10-year-old, it was simply exciting. The opportunity to go on board a boat, the opportunity to go to a new country. We really didn't know as children what the implications of this was. You know, television did not exist, radio was scarce, we didn't read much about it. It was simply an unknown, and we're going to an unknown. There's a picture of me sitting in my little suitcase in front of Pier 21 that's in the family album. I remember coming in, I remember the huge crowds. I think there's 1,500 or 1,600 people came off the vessel at the same time. Pier 21 was bedlam. As I indicated earlier, I remember my first breakfast in Canada, and it was so foreign to us. It was cornflakes and scrambled eggs. And for us, we couldn't eat it. It was simply so different than the breakfast that we were used to, where we came from. So the feeling of strangeness, it pervades Pier 21 in my memory.
One of so many stories. In just a few minutes, we're going to speak with Ruth Goldbloom, who is the woman behind the mission to make the Pier 21 Center a reality. But first, here's a quick look at some of that transformation as Pier 21 changes from a waterfront warehouse to a national world-class site. When workers looked around at Pier 21 last fall, they knew renovations couldn't be too gentle. Ceilings were punched out, brickwork had to be removed and replaced, and steel beams shored up. Walls had to be built and new windows placed on the waterfront side to provide future visitors with a view of the George's Island Lighthouse. Over the months, a model of a ship took shape and new walls were built, and just this month, exhibits began moving into their new home. While just a few days ago the interior looked like this, these sketches provide a glimpse of what the final product will look like when the museum is officially opened on July 1st. What a remarkable transformation it has been. Ruth Goldbloom joins me now. Welcome.
Good evening.
So tell me, this has been a huge project. Why did you decide to take it on?
Well, the founding president of this was John LeBlanc. And when he came to me and asked me to join the board, I just had a vision then of what we could really do for Pier 21. It's the last remaining immigration shed in all of Canada. And we as a board felt that we had to do something to make sure it would stay alive.
So tell me, what kind of an experience will it be for visitors?
Well, I think it'll really be a very emotional experience, Linda. You know, anybody can change a building, anybody can move bricks and mortar around, but what we're really doing with Pier 21, the heartbeat and the pulse of Pier 21 are the human interest stories. The people who came through Pier 21, remember it opened in 1928, and we're now capturing stories across Canada of all of these people who came through from every walk of life. And if we didn't capture their stories now, they'd be gone forever.
Can you give us an idea of what people will see when they come to the site?
Yes. First, you will walk into the Chrysler Welcome Pavilion while we're looking at our wonderful harbor. And in it, we'll have a gift shop and coffee shop, an art gallery run by the Multicultural Association. But upstairs is the Resource Center, and that really also is the heartbeat. On that, you'll be able to find the names of all the ships. We get calls every day from people who say, my grandfather died, do you have any idea when he came in? And we can now find his name through the Resource Center, tell the name of the ship, give a description, the number of passengers, the day it arrived, etc. And people across Canada will now be able to get this information. But the exhibition hall where we're standing now is the true pulse. And in it you will see and hear stories from people across Canada, from every background who came through. You will sit and watch a 24-minute film in our in-transit theater, which will show you how people left their homeland, arrived at Pier 21, were processed, finally allowed to stay, etc. And then a wonderful train. And the train is going to have 6 testimonial stations. And as we speak, these interviews are going on across Canada from every walk of life, and you'll be able to hear real live stories of people, from people who came through.
Very briefly, we just have a little bit of time, but the grand opening is July 1st.
Yes, indeed it is, at 9:30 a.m., and it's just going to be spectacular.
Everything looks wonderful so far. They're almost ready to go. Ruth Goldbloom, I thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks.
My name is Joan Schneer, and I came to Canada on December the 13th, 1946. I married a Canadian soldier. We arrived in Halifax at 8 in the morning, and the things I noticed was that the houses were different colors. They were so different from brick houses. But when I got off the ship and going through that great big pier there, and I remember all the people there, and the big, tall, lofty building, and I was thinking to myself, this is, you've stepped into a different world. It really was different. And then when we came out of the pier, I said, where's the city? And they said, you're in it. And I came from London, so it was a big, vast difference to me. It was the beginning of another life to me. It was like, I felt like Alice in Wonderland when she, fell down the rabbit hole, and there was a whole different scenario.
More wonderful stories. Bruce, welcome. Sports is next.
Thank you, Linda. A wonderful story yesterday at the U.S. Open Golf Tournament. Payne Stewart, after a year of heartbreak, was back on top. Stay with us. Sports is next.
My name is Marianne Ferguson. My maiden name was Echt, E-C-H-T. And I came here in March of 1939 to Pier 21 with my parents, my grandmother, and my 2 sisters. We came from Danzig, which was supposedly a free state, but was very German. There were also Polish people there, but mostly German. And we came because the situation had become so bad that, and the Nazis were making so much trouble that we were afraid that if we didn't make a move, we would also go to the concentration camps like so many others. We very quietly left on my 13th birthday. My one sister and I left first. They didn't want to make too much fuss so that people shouldn't say, oh, they're leaving and must do something, maybe something terrible to them, stop them from going.
Do you remember having a feeling of relief once you got on the ship?
Oh, yes. Yes, much.
Can you describe it for me?
You have a feeling that people aren't after you all the time, or you have to look over your shoulder all the time. And yet, when we arrived and somebody called our names, my father got very worried. You know, it's something that's sort of built into you after all that, what you go through there. And because when people called your name at a strange station or port or something, they used to think, oh, something's going to happen. But it was only the lady who was meeting us.
Canada's been called a nation of immigrants, and all this week on First Edition we're telling the stories of some of the people who have come to Canada from different countries and in different ways. Tonight, through the back door, Ioana Roumeliotis looks at how thousands of people use the refugee system to get into Canada.
a former motel in Winnipeg. People come here from all over the world. Refugees, seeking protection, a better life.
What this world could not see.
Anything is worth it if you become a Canadian, I think. Anything. And if you have a family like mine, I think anything is worth it, anything.
Canada. It's been called the border of hope. Refugee claimants know if they turn up here, Canada won't turn them away. It's a generous system designed to protect the world's most vulnerable. But critics say it's too generous, wide open to abuse. People use our refugee system to get into this country through the back door.
Hello, besito.
Louis Cardi Risco's story begins long before the birth of his two children. He came to Canada because he knew he would never get refugee status in the United States. He couldn't stay in the former Soviet Union where he was studying. His wife Elena was a military student and not allowed to marry a foreigner. And Louis couldn't go home to Peru.
I study in Russian, so they think that I can be a terrorist or that I involved with the terrorist groups in Peru. And for the government, that is enemy of the country.
So they came to Winnipeg because they thought they could stay.
Everybody was thinking and talking about that in Canada, almost everybody who applied for refugee, they're staying in Canada. And when I heard about Canada and about the reputation of Canada, I think that's it. That's my future home. That's where I'm gonna live.
Hi, Olga. How are you doing?
Janice Nickel is a refugee advocate with Winnipeg's International Centre. She says thousands of refugees bank on Canada's compassionate reputation.
Canada itself is sort of the country to apply. We are well noted for our human rights advocacy. We're recognized all across the world to respect human rights.
Good, sir. My name is Michael Hamill, a member of the Immigration and Refugee Board. Try to relax as much as you can.
That reputation draws 25,000 refugee claimants a year. Virtually all of them get a hearing with the Immigration and Refugee Board. At this hearing in Montreal, a man from India asks for protection.
Who is it you fear would persecute you were you to return to India today?
The IRB is a quasi-judicial body. It determines whether a claimant qualifies as a refugee under the Geneva Convention, an international agreement that compels countries to grant asylum to anyone with a well-founded fear of persecution in their homeland, based on one or more of 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group.
The realities are that very often they are coming from situations where they may have been traumatized.
Nurjahan Mawani is chairperson of the IRB.
Refugee determination is sensitive, it's complex, and we've got to be able to find a way in which a person can tell her story without intimidation, without fear, and yet at the same time be able to have a challenge function.
Up until a few years ago, even the IRB admits it didn't challenge enough. At one point, 84% of refugee claimants got asylum, an acceptance rate that attracted people from around the world. That led to a huge backlog. To this day, there are still more than 20,000 cases to be determined. It can take months to get a hearing, years to get a decision.
They allowed the system to overload itself. It was so accessible, it was so easy to claim refugee status. The chances of success were enormous. The country was literally flooded with tens of thousands of refugee claimants. And I just thought they were out of control.
Michael Prue is a harsh critic of the Immigration and Refugee Board. He's worked as counsel to 14 immigration ministers. He says Canada's compassion is a magnet for many bogus claims, at a huge cost to Canadians.
The board spends about $84 million a year. Two-thirds of what they spend per year goes into the refugee determination. So you're looking at about more than $50 million that Canadian taxpayers are paying to weed out those who are legitimate refugees versus those who are not.
It's just beautiful.
Louis' story didn't sway the IRB. It denied his claim. The board said time had passed since he fled Peru. Things had changed. It was safe to go back. The government sent Louis a deportation order, but he didn't pack his bags.
I had a family and I was ready to fight to the last minute, to the last appeal, to spend my last single money to stay in Canada.
Louis, are you going to be back there soon?
Yeah, very soon.
Like most failed refugee claimants, Louis didn't give up. He continued working.
Hello, Eugene.
Appealed the IRB's decision.
New order?
It didn't work.
Set.
So Louis took the last recourse Canada had to offer, immigration. He argued the government should let him stay because he'd already set up a life here. That application was rejected. Louis appealed. Again, that bought him even more time to build his case.
That was 3 years ago.
Hello, caretaker.
Since then, Louis and his wife both got jobs. Their son, Artyom, was born.
Comment s'appelle la recette? Elisabeth, comment s'appelle la recette?
They even enrolled their daughter, Elizabeth, in a French immersion school.
Avec un demi-pêche.
The more time pass, it's more time for me to prove it that I really involved in this community, that I really apport into this country.
He is probably using every single legal maneuver that he can to remain here. He is not the only one. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people like him in this country.
Under immigration law, if you want to live here, you must apply from another country. But there are all kinds of conditions, and no guarantee you'll get in. Louis is bypassing that law, trying to apply from within Canada, trying to get in through the back door.
I don't blame them for wanting to live here. I mean, this is a great country. But Canada should not allow something as almost as sacred as the Geneva Convention to be abused in the way it is.
It is not a crime to want a better life for yourself and for your children. People leave behind their lives, their communities. They leave everything for a better chance. Sometimes they're not political refugees. Sometimes they don't fit the definition of a convention refugee. They're simply human beings with a desire to make a better life.
The government doesn't track how many failed refugee claimants stay here, but there are enough that it's making changes. This fall, it's tabling a bill to overhaul the Immigration Act. Part of it will reform the IRB, curb the abuse. Claimants will get a hearing faster. They'll get a decision faster. And with it, another decision on 2 levels of appeal. That could eliminate delays by a year, cut down on the time failed claimants can build their cases as immigrants.
Delays in the system, I think, are not good for the individuals concerned, and they're not good for the system as a whole. I think we all recognize that, and I think we are all working towards reducing the delays.
The legitimate refugees, the real ones, the 10, 20, 25% that are real refugees, whatever that number is, will find that they are accorded the status very quickly, they are processed to landing, their life is made secure. The ones that are not real refugees, they will find that their claim is heard fast enough that it isn't worth the economics of coming to Canada, buying the ticket, trying to establish your life. If your claim is heard within 6 months, the economics of it make no sense.
See my Jesus on the cross.
Louis held on for 3 years, but time's run out. The government rejected his last immigration application. Louis and his family have to leave. There are no more options, but Louis still refuses to go. The church that has given him comfort now is giving him sanctuary.
What this world could not see was when they
For now, the future of Luis and thousands of other refugees like him is unknown. But when First Edition continues, a story with a happy ending.
I'm Alexander van Gerp, and I came here in 1953 aboard an immigration ship, and we settled in Halifax right away and have been here ever since. We came from Holland, and of course in Holland at that time housing situations were perilous. And I remember arriving here, and my wife sometimes tells me that when she looked at the houses, she thought, these aren't real houses, because she went up close and thought that they were wooden houses, and then found that it was some kind of an imitation shingle made of tire.
What does Pier 21 mean to you if you drive by it, living in the city?
Well, when I drive by it, I immediately see myself sitting on that bench with the family, of course, and see us being processed. So it still has sentimental value to us. It symbolizes the start of I was first going to say a new phase in our life, but maybe I should say the start of our life, of our adult life.
Over the decades, more than 1 million immigrants came through Pier 21 on the Halifax waterfront. Some came as war brides, some as displaced persons, and some simply as people looking for a new life. But some also came as foreign enemies. Here's Jerry Burr with a story that starts in war and ends in peace.
What did Canada mean to me or to us? Canada was a piece of ice in the northern hemisphere there. I came to Canada as a POW, as a prisoner of war, in 1940 from England.
Joachim Ostheimer was 16 years old, a sailor on a German merchant marine ship in the Second World War. Britain captured the vessel and sank it. Joachim became a prisoner of war. He soon found himself crossing the Atlantic for internment with other POWs.
I remember so well when we landed there was some factory of some sort of a company limited or something like that was on there. But nobody spoke any English or anything like that. Finally, one guy comes tearing down, I know where we are, I know where we are. I said, where are we? Or not just me, everybody asked that. He said, oh, we're in Limited. Some company limited.
It was Halifax, Pier 21. From there, the Canadian Army transported the POWs by train to internment camps. Joachim went to Monteith, Ontario.
We were very easy and free in camp, you know. We had all sports facilities. The only thing, as long as we were there, twice a day we were counted and 3 times a day we were fed. That's all.
There was even more freedom to come. The POWs were allowed beyond the barbed wires of the camps to work on farms as volunteers. Joachim grabbed the chance. He was sent to Carleton Place near Ottawa to the farm of Earl and Edith Willows. Edith is now 92.
We're not getting older, we're getting better.
She lives with her family in Kingston, happy to see Joachim whenever he visits. She was just as welcoming when he was a POW.
We didn't think he'd be any more danger than the next door neighbor. But we did have neighbors come and tell us that we were being very foolish. We'd not waking up some morning and things like that. And you know, that's awfully unsettling, but we were sure that it was quite all right.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Those were people, they were so nice. Anything at all, I just had to think it half loud, and I got it, whatever I wanted.
Earl Willows has passed away.
I still say he was a saint, and she was a doll. We still call them our Canadian parents. You remember when I first unloaded you here?
Joachim brings his wife Rosie to revisit the old farm. Storms have since ravaged the place, but not their sense of amazement that a young man who was once a member of the Hitler Youth could be so welcome in Canada.
You know, it's funny, even be a German POW. Okay, he was not a soldier. He was in a merchant navy, but still he was from the enemy. That they accepted him like that. It's the people, that's their nature, I suppose so.
Canada may have been at war with Germany, but not with the Germans.
I had learned the language. I had learned to love those people here. I have learned to love this country, the wide open spaces. And then I decided, boy, I would like to stay here.
He tried his best. He was told POWs could remain in Canada after the war if they had sponsors, and Joachim had the Willows as sponsors.
So the next morning, we were called into the dining room. The commandant wanted to talk to us. So we thought, oh, now that's it, now we can leave. So he said, I'm awfully sorry. We cannot keep you here. We thought we could, but the immigration agreed, but the English didn't agree, because you were all English POWs, and you have to go back there to get your discharge.
In 1946, he was sent back to Germany, unhappy to be there.
When I came back home, I thought to myself, Germany, it shrunk. Everything was so small. I wasn't at home for an hour. Then I said to Mommy, I want to go back there.
But he got on with his life. He married Rosie, had 2 children, worked as a truck driver and mechanic.
Okay, he had a good job and all, but he said, you can give me heaven, I still go back to Canada.
In 1951, Canada lifted its restriction on immigrants from former enemy states. Joachim was allowed back in with his family. This time he sailed to Quebec City, and this time he knew where he was. He was home.
I can't describe that. I felt good. I had my wife with me. I had 2 kids, one 3 years old on Daddy's hand. Oh, we left Quebec City then, I guess around noon, and we came to Carton Place at 3 o'clock in the morning. There they were, standing there, those 2 people, waiting for us.
He started out working on the Willows farm, but he had to give that up when he fell sick.
We were very disappointed at that, but it turned out that it was far better for him.
He moved to Montreal to become a garage mechanic. He knew German cars inside out. He opened his own Mercedes-Benz dealership in 1965. Today he's retired. Joachim's children now have careers in the business he built.
I was one of the lucky ones that ended up in this country.
Jerry Bearer, CBC News, Montreal.
Oh, what a wonderful story.
Beautiful indeed. To sports now, Linda. Game 3 NBA Final highlights are next when we return. Stay with us.
My name is Barbara Campbell. I became a Campbell after I married my husband in Germany. He was part of the occupational forces after the war. And we immigrated to Canada, or at least I immigrated. He certainly returned to his home in 1957. I met him at a wedding of my girlfriend, who married a Canadian soldier at the time, and I was a good friend of my husband's, and I was invited by her. And so we met at the wedding. We became very attached to one another. It was sort of love at first sight, you know. I didn't really know what to expect because I had missed a lot of schooling during the war. We didn't learn anything about Canada to begin with, but even less so when you haven't been in touch with any educational institution. And so we didn't learn anything where Canada was, what the people were like, what life could be. And so I heard many warnings from my family and friends. Now, you be careful. But when we arrived, I remember being excited about seeing land and setting foot on solid ground again. But the site wasn't exactly colorful or inviting. It was December, early December, gray. The landscape was gray. The berth that we came into, the pier, was dark and uninviting. It was not the kind of picture I would like to have seen on my first arrival. However, I was home.
In the past, immigrants to Canada have often arrived with little more than the clothes on their backs. Today's newcomers are frequently better educated and have more money. But once here, they may find the reality of life in Canada is very different from the vision that brought them here. Hamlin Grange has that story.
Nearly 250,000 immigrants come to Canada each year searching for a new life. Most of them settle in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver because of greater job opportunities, creating something immigration authorities call the MTV effect. They come expecting to find work, a safe place to live, a place to raise their children. After a 16-hour flight from Shanghai, Ren Chung Wang and his family are about to start a new life in a strange land.
Hi, do you want to follow me? Yeah. Okay. Are you immigrating today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I need to see your passports, your customs cards, and your immigrant visas.
Yes.
Okay.
Immigration visa.
Thank you very much. Is this your whole family, your entire family?
Yeah,
You only have one child?
Yeah.
Okay. And how old is your child?
15 months.
15 months?
An immigrant comes with enormous expectations, and then often, not always, but often, those expectations are dashed by the barriers they find working against them once they come here.
Well, I don't know if we've created it. I don't think anybody's forced to come here, and I don't think there's anything new about that. Immigration is a very difficult thing to do.
The Wangs are the type of immigrants Canada wants to attract. They're educated.
Have you ever been
He's an electrical engineer. She worked for the Chinese government.
to jail?
And like all independent immigrants, they bring money.
I need to know how much money you have in your possession today with you.
Now we take nearly 50,000
$50,000
US dollars.
US dollars. I need your signature here and your initials here. Always travel with this original paper. Do you have any questions?
The health card,
Mhm.
identity.
Social insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have a settlement services help you today, and they'll give you all the forms for those cards to apply.
Welcome to Canada.
Last year, more than 67,000 new immigrants arrived at Toronto's Pearson Airport. But there are differing opinions on just how beneficial new immigrants are to Canada.
There's evidence that they create more businesses, they sort of jumpstart the Canadian economy, they pay taxes, they create a market for our manufactured goods.
If they created jobs, we would have zero unemployment in this country because we have had the most massive influx of immigrants of any country in the world over the last 10 years.
So, welcome to Canada.
Thank you.
Immigrants built Canada with skill and hard work. And their dreams back then were the dreams of all immigrants, the hope for a better life. Today's immigrants have the same dreams, but they are better educated and have higher expectations, expectations that may not be met. The Wangs are met by the immigration consultant, whom they paid more than $6,000 US just to get information on how to immigrate to Canada.
The assistance from your side, we can successfully to get our job and temporary accommodation.
That temporary accommodation will be at a house in the east end of Toronto. The landlord warns the Wangs about their 2-year-old son. She doesn't want him running around the house. She also hopes they won't be staying too long. They'll share a kitchen and a bathroom for $550 a month. Not ideal accommodations, but the Wangs are happy to be in Canada.
We can live here with freedom in this country, so wonderful country.
Many of their possessions were left behind in Shanghai, but some things are more valuable than books and furniture. Family.
We also left some sorry feeling to our parents. We're here, far away from where my parents and my parents-in-law located.
A few days after settling in, the Wangs explore the most multicultural city in the world.
I'd like to welcome you to the CN Towers, the world's tallest building and freestanding structure.
Playing tourist in their new city is fun, but learning to get around is more important. While Wei struggles to learn the new language, her husband looks for work. It won't be easy. Statistics show today's immigrants have more education, but find fewer jobs.
I have been a professional engineer.
Back home?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, what I would do is suggest that you go and see our resource center.
The Employment Resource Center is a federally funded program designed to help new immigrants.
We're using MS Word.
Wang decides not to use the center to find a job. He says the service is too slow. He's looking for work as an electrical engineer, something he's done for 13 years. But he soon realizes his credentials as an engineer are not valid in Ontario, a common problem faced by new immigrants. Immigrants are also told they need Canadian experience to be hired.
What they find here is racism. And so one of the major barriers to their accessing employment, housing, and other benefits is the, I should say other rights, is the problem of racist attitudes and institutional practices against them.
But writer Daniel Stoffman says it's not racism. Canada is simply accepting too many immigrants.
It used to be that we would have a flow of people from one country, and then that would drop off, and those people would tend to get absorbed quite quickly. Now there's maybe a change in that you have a continuing flow.
We cannot make another choice, so we have to stay here. We have followed our decision, so we have to modify our thought and modify our behavior, our status.
And maybe that's the lesson many new immigrants to Canada are learning. Being highly skilled and educated is a two-edged sword. Yes, they have a lot to offer Canada, but they also have high expectations, not only for their children's future, but for themselves. And they want those expectations met right now, but sometimes they can't. So some immigrants lower their expectations and do what they must to become Canadians. The Zheng family has been in Canada for 3.5 months. Their experience so far may be what the Wang family has to look forward to. He was an engineer in China. She worked in the tax department. They've had a hard time finding work in their field and have settled for less. She now works in a textile factory. He just got a short-term contract as a computer programmer.
I'm disappointed. If I have 10 years education, 20 years education, I still can't find a job in that field. How can I do? Why I come here? We discarded everything in China, and we come here.
To better fit into Canadian society, the Zhengs changed their names. He's now James. She's Gloria. Their son is now David. It's another curse of the immigrant. But the Wangs and the Zhengs hope coming to Canada will turn dreams into reality.
My dream is we'll have a happy life here. I want my son to have a good education, to study in the University of Toronto.
If we wait for my son become very strong in Canadian society, we were old. I think we have to try to do our best to catch our dream, to follow our dream.
Ultimately, most immigrants dream not about themselves, but about their children's future. And although some of the barriers the Wangs face now may one day challenge their son, his journey should be easier. Hamlin Grange, CBC News, Toronto.
Most immigrants to Canada settle in one of the big cities, Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver. But not always. We'll explain when First Edition returns.
My name is Finn Sander, and I came to Canada in 1953. I was 13 years old, and we came from Denmark. And the perception was then, and I'm sure that was true, that economically speaking, we had better opportunities in this country. This was post-war Europe, so things were still a little bit tough. And I'm sure my parents thought that, as far as I'm concerned, I had better opportunities in North America than I would have in Denmark, in the old country. And we arrived in Halifax and took the train to Montreal. We felt we were coming to America. Canada was part of America. America was this golden country across the sea. My uncle was the black sheep of the family, so to speak, so he was prone to exaggeration. And one of the reasons my parents came was that he assured us that he had a job for my father, a house to live in, and a car, and a television, which meant something in those days. And none of those things materialized. When we came at the station, he was there to greet us, but that was about it. That was the only support we got from him. So we ended up in a small rooming house, in a small room with a kerosene burner, and for the first month, that's where we lived. And for the first month, my mother cried every day, I guess.
Each year, some 200,000 immigrants arrive in Canada, willing and eager to make this country their home. It's a huge country, but almost all those immigrants end up in one of three cities, Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. But that situation may be changing. A small town in Manitoba has come up with a matchmaking scheme to pair up skilled workers who want to immigrate with empty jobs waiting in rural Canada. Ross Rutherford explains.
Olena Dirksen is an immigrant. This job in a small Manitoba town is a new beginning, and it's menial work compared to the responsible job she held as a midwife in Germany less than a year ago. But she accepts it with good grace.
I knew that coming to Canada, it wouldn't be easy to find a job right away as a midwife. And this is an interesting job, working as a cook. I knew that it would have to be different in Canada.
Elena, willkommen.
Dirksen, her husband Andreas, and their 4 children immigrated from Germany last year. Behind them, a 9-year odyssey that began in Siberia during the collapse of the old Soviet Union. Ahead of them, a new country, with a few adventures waiting. But this kind of weather they've endured in Siberia. For the moment, there's an opportunity to make new friends. For Andreas, a new workplace. He's already landed a job based on a skill he has perfected over the years. And for the children, a new school. And there's a new home as well, to replace the home they sold in Germany. It's all part of a new life, together with 38 other immigrant families. Their new hometown is an hour's drive south of Winnipeg, in and around Winkler, population 8,500. It's a farming community with German and Russian roots, and a flavor of old world orthodoxy.
I really like the people here. I feel very much at home here.
The new arrivals are unloading their past and preparing their future, all as part of a new approach to immigration. About 200,000 newcomers arrive in Canada each year. Manitoba's share, based on population, should be about 8,000, but year after year it receives less than half that figure. And in 1998, it plummeted to just under 3,000 immigrants.
Usually the larger centers are those centers that get the most promotion and the most airtime.
Jerry Clement is in charge of citizenship programs for the Manitoba government.
I think what we have to do is we have to be more involved as a province and start to make changes that affect immigration to this province.
So business people in Winkler seized the initiative. They themselves decided to actively seek out prospective immigrants who possess the skills and experience needed to handle a serious shortage of workers in the town. And the Manitoba government agreed to support the plan as a pilot project. Immigration is a process of points. The more points the person gets, the better the chances of immigrating. So Ottawa agreed to assign extra points to applicants if they had the promise of a job in Manitoba. Adele Dick is an immigration consultant. She went to Germany and found people eager to come here. She's helped many of them settle in. And the choice of Germany was no accident.
Language is a big issue, definitely, because many of these people speak a Low German, which is the language that many of our people speak in Winkler here. And it's the cultural background.
I'm going to say a part of a sentence.
Several of the Dirksons' evenings are spent here each week learning English. During the day, 10-year-old Elena Jr. joins children from other immigrant families in trying to learn the language as well.
And number 4?
With all the new people, Winkler is experiencing a small construction boom as well. And just as the town is getting used to the results of its own initiative, the provincial government has signed an even bigger immigration agreement with Ottawa. It will affect the whole province. It's called the Manitoba Nominee Program.
Information about himself, filling out application forms.
Jerry Clement says the scheme operates much like the Winkler pilot project.
Provincial nominees are individuals who have skills or a particular profile that Manitoba is looking for. And by allowing Manitoba to establish its own selection criteria, we can increase the number of skilled immigrants coming to this province.
Walter Trebus and his family were accepted. They're still unpacking following their arrival in the Winkler area just a few weeks ago. They're also from Germany, and they're among the first of 200 applicants and their families who have been nominated by the province of Manitoba this year. Their reason for the move here was simple.
Die Freiheit.
Was ist das? Freiheit in Deutschland?
Freiheit in Deutschland.
There is freedom in Germany, but it's not the type of freedom that one gets here.
Aber nur mit 600 Quadrat Grundstück.
Here, take a look at my acreage. The kids can go and play in freedom. I don't have to tell them, don't go on the street, don't do this, don't do that, don't play here, don't play there.
For now, these families are Manitobans, but the question is, for how long? The Trebus family and the other immigrants now have total freedom to move to any other parts of Canada, and that could defeat the whole purpose of the plan.
Will they stay? Will they set down roots? And usually if you've got family or a community that is supportive, that's where you stay.
Can you guarantee that they'll stay?
No, I can't guarantee. Canada has a Charter of Rights that allows for complete mobility from coast to coast. We just want to make sure that the conditions are right for people to stay.
Aber wir sind jetzt hier nach Winkler gekommen und über andere.
Right now, what we know is Winkler, and we hope to never consider moving anywhere else.
Mir gefällt's hier.
I really feel at home here. I have been to Alberta. There's a lot of forest there, a lot of mountains, but this is my home.
Our immigration series will continue all week, but if you'd like more information on any of the stories we've aired and on the Pier 21 project, please visit our website. Once again, www.halifax.cbc.ca. Check us out on the web.
Coming up in sports, a formidable duo, one half of which totally Nova Scotian. Stay with us. Sports is next on First Edition.
I'm Chris McCarley. I came to Canada, arrived on the 6th of January of 1945. We sailed on New Year's Eve. For a Scotsman, that's something, Hogmanay. I married a Canadian serviceman, and it was a bit of a shock because this was 6 months before the war finished, and I thought, well, we wouldn't be going until after the war, at least. But we came, I got about 10 days' notice. And you couldn't tell anyone. Loose slip sink ships, but lots of tears and, you know, lots of sadness. But when you're young, it's an adventure. And 6 days in a ship, you're in a different world. We were told at noon hour on the day we arrived, at lunchtime, over the PA system, that we were going to be in Halifax. I think it was clear, so it must have been 3:30, around 3 o'clock. We all went to the deck and we watched for land. There was a little bit of snow, northwest arm, I know now that's what it was. A little bit of snow, just a little bit of snow, and the white church steeples and the white wooden houses. We don't have wooden houses in Britain. They're all stone, but these white painted wooden houses and the evergreen trees, it looked like the pictures we'd seen of Canada, and certainly looked like a Christmas card.
Tonight in our Pier 21 series, they came and they stayed. More than 90% of the immigrants who came through Halifax left by train to Toronto, Montreal, or beyond. But the Felderhofs, all 14 of them, decided Nova Scotia was as far as they were going. This province became their new home. Here's Catherine Clark with their story.
They came from Holland, a mother, a father, and 12 children. Destination not just Canada, but Nova Scotia.
I think my father was a natural adventurer. He had a big family. He saw there were, you know, great opportunities for all the children here.
This is the story of the Felderhof family. A father, a doctor who thought of himself as an adventurer, and a family that followed his adventure to Canada. Ineke Felderhof Graham was 17 when she left Holland, captured on grainy film with her family leaving Rotterdam Harbor.
He had a very close friend who had the intention of going to Canada. And he was a businessman, and he was a very close friend to my father and mother. And I think my father was inspired to do the same thing.
Clarence, a retired surgeon, was 12.
I think the expectations, were one of excitement, really, and adventure. I think all my siblings felt that.
Kathy is now a doctor in New Glasgow.
I was 4 when we left Holland. I don't think I was really aware, as my older brothers were, that we were going anywhere exciting, except that we were leaving.
Kathy's brother Dick is also a doctor.
As soon as we learned we were going to go, because we got the little grammar, English grammar, learned some basic English words, you know, just to get through the first few years in Canada.
As a foreign doctor, Herman Felderhof had to complete an internship before he could practice. The family moved to Belmont outside of Truro, true rural Nova Scotia living of the 50s. Herman Felderhof, named after his father, is now a Crown Attorney in New Glasgow. He was 3 when he came to Canada. He and his twin brother, Will, were the youngest of the 12 kids.
I do recall I was in the country. It was a big house, an old house that didn't have, I seem to recall not having central heat, but it might have. I recall a wood stove in the kitchen, and I recall it being very cold one day in the winter because the stove went out. And I can recall the socks were frozen in the line, on the clothesline in the kitchen.
It wasn't until we went to New Glasgow, which was about a year later after my father finished his Canadian medical internship. And when I was exposed to what was my first word, which was slush, and realizing later, what a strange word to be introduced to. You know, it seemed like I was really disappointed that it was a word that didn't mean that much. But actually, that is what we were surrounded with, was, you know, this snow and water and slush.
Given I'm 48 now, and my dad was 47, I believe, when he moved to Canada with my mother, it strikes me now more so than it did a number of years ago. That's quite an event, quite a move, because I can't imagine doing that myself.
Yeah, my father's a very private man, but I think I made statements in terms of how much he enjoyed being here in Canada. I mean, how free he felt, and that I think there was no doubt in his mind that he made the right choice. If he had to do it over again, he'd do it over again.
Pier 21 has strong memories for this family. Although half of the Felderhoff clan still lives in Nova Scotia, the others are scattered all over the world. Notable physicist Yubo, John, founder of the site of the infamous Briex gold mine, all remember their beginning here. So when Ineke Felderhoff-Graham started her art gallery, one name came instantly to mind.
When we came here, of course, it was starting a whole new life, you know, new country, new expectations. When I found myself on my own during my life at one point, I started my gallery, art gallery, and of course I had to give it a name, and I was thinking, Studio 21 came to my mind, because when we came here, it was starting a new life, and starting my own gallery was a new life for me. So I called it Studio 21, and it is in fact named after Pier 21. But it's like come full circle.
Catherine Clark, CBC News, Halifax.
I'm Gerhard Schroeder, and we came to Canada from Germany, Hamburg, Germany, in 1951. Coming from Hamburg, the city was devastated, and coming to Canada, and by the way, we didn't land in Halifax. Because the princess was here on her royal visit with Prince Philip, so we got diverted and went to Quebec City. And when we landed in Quebec City, because our destination was Halifax, we got transferred to a train, and we came from Quebec City on a train, and came to Halifax. And every time we looked out the windows, we could see this wide open space, you see, and we couldn't get over that. We moved into Pier 21 and stayed there for about 2.5, 3 weeks, till I found employment with a painting contractor. And it's the moment that one member of the family found employment, and we could sort of look after ourselves then. We had to leave Pier 21 and make room, of course, for somebody else coming in.
There's lots more information about Pier 21 and our CBC Pier 21 programming on the internet, and you can access the site through our homepage. Once again, www.halifax.cbc.ca. And we'd like to know what you think about this special series and anything else you see here on First Edition. Write us a letter, send us an email, and give us your thoughts. Our address is always up at the end of the program, so we hope to hear from you soon. Up next, Election 99. We talk to two political junkies about the campaign and how it's going so far. That's next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Tonight, we wrap up our week-long series on Pier 21 and immigration. Newfoundland reporter Atso Rizori talks about what it's like to leave one life and to start another, an experience he knows about firsthand.
It was 15 years ago. I'd reached St. John's after a stormy crossing from North Sydney to Port aux Basques and a dreary mid-November drive across the island. I'd never seen a more forbidding place in my life. By the time I got to St. John's, I'd run out of all the hopes and dreams I'd brought with me. Of course, by then, I should have known better than to bring them along in the first place.
I was born into the wreckage of post-war Germany. All this destruction was supposed to guarantee my generation freedom from dictators. But my two brothers and I ran into our own struggle, growing up in a family which was turning into a dictatorship itself. Slowly, somebody else's personal mythology tightens around you until you know it's time to run. July 21st, 1971. That's when I arrived with a plane load of other European immigrants at Dorval Airport in Montreal. Status, landed immigrant. Age 26, occupation student. Everything was a marvel at first. The sweltering heat of Canadian summers, the blazing colors of its falls, its snowlands of winter and wastelands of spring. When I came back down to earth, it hit me. The fact that I was a stranger here, that everything I grew up with and was familiar with belonged somewhere else. I fell apart, dropped out of geology, tried my hand at teaching, at small engine mechanics, at carpentry, interior decorating, and finally, journalism. This is another thing many of us immigrants have in common, the ghost of an old self. And each one of us has their own way of dealing with it.
That was wartime in Croatia, 1994, 1995, and that was really dangerous being there at that time, and I just decided to pull out my family and look for a better life. Oh yeah, I miss being in Croatia sometimes. Definitely, I'm missing some things from Croatia, but I'm really trying to push that aside. I just want to contribute to this country on the best way that I can. I'm just trying to fit in.
I love this harbor. On days when the fog creeps in through the Narrows and curls its fingers around Signal Hill, you'd swear you're inside some kind of painting. It took me 14 years to find this. 14 years of moving from one place to another. Ontario, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, back to Ontario. Those were my refugee camps. It could have been a lot worse.
Thursday, okay.
Your name? 10,000 people there.
Oh, it's horrible situation, you know. You don't have enough food to eat. You don't have enough water to drink, and
you get to line up to get your water for at least 5-6 hours.
It's really fear, you know, a lot of fear and worrying, and you don't know where are you going to go.
The only thing you wish every day is to get up and wish you can get out of this, you know, the refugee camp. That's all.
It's just hopeless.
Sometimes I heard people stay for 2 or 3 years. I just was scared, you know, 2 or 3 years in the camp, you know.
So after I get accepted from Canadian, oh, that's what I was quite. I'm too happy.
All right. For me, stepping off the plane in Montreal 28 years ago was just the beginning of this thing called immigration.
Out you go. Okay, you want to hold that down?
For years, you walk around with your roots stripped and exposed. And then you suddenly know you've found the right conditions for putting those roots down again.
Do you want to put it down and see if it fits? Perfect. I think that's probably just right. No, it's not quite the size of the others, but it'll grow.
It'll grow.
It'll
go a little bit more in, honey.
Yep.
That's it. Good.
The most important thing for me, this is really a safe place to raise your child. And after that war experience, that was really important for us.
I think that's all parents, you know, they are hope for that. The children growing up without fear.
Maybe it's not quite what some of us had in mind when we first set out. But somewhere along the way, you let go of those hopes and dreams you brought along with you. And something else, something more real and more rewarding, falls into place.
If you'd like more information about the Pier 21 project, you can check out their homepage on the net, and you can access it through the CBC homepage at www.halifax.cbc.ca. Still to come tonight, the first week of the campaign through the eyes of Harry and Parker. The political panel is next, so do stay with us. First Edition will be right back.